Organized religion has been known to divide people almost as much as it has been known to bring them together. Even self-described liberal congregations are challenged to overcome resistance to having truthful conversations about race and privilege. On this episode of Race Talk with Lane and Eugene, an interfaith panel of ordained clergy and lay leaders discuss the role of religion in perpetuating racist ideals and oppressive systems, and the role and responsibility of faith leaders to dismantle them. This episode originally aired July 21st, 2021.
Oh man, again, welcome to another Race Talk Revolution with Lane and Eugene. And this is where your voice matters. You know, this is our final episode of this 8-week series of Race Talk Revolution. And our next series will begin, Series 8 will begin on August 11th. And what I really like about that is that will really be marking our year. We've been doing this for 1 year, Lane and I, and it's been nothing but a beautiful experience. So this afternoon, our conversation is about the role that religion has played in perpetuating racist ideas and systems of oppression, and the role that faith leaders play in dismantling those ideas and systems. And just please be reminded once again that Race Talk Revolution is a loving, respectful, inclusive platform designed to encourage constructive dialogue around these tough issues pertaining to racial and social justice. It is a safe space for people of all backgrounds to share your ideas and opinions, to explore the nuances of systemic racism, and to grow our anti-racism muscles. In our Race Talk Revolution community, we practice radical, inclusive love. So even if we don't understand or agree with what's being shared, we listen with respect, appreciation, and empathy. Our commitment is that every person be encouraged, heard, and appreciated, because here on Race Talk Revolution with Lane and Eugene, everyone's voices matter. I want to turn it over to my co-host, Reverend Lane Cobb.
Good day, everyone. So great to see you guys. I know we have some first timers in the house. Thank you for coming. Welcome, welcome, welcome. We hope you'll come back when we start our next series on August 11th. We are so pleased to have this wonderful panel with us today. Eugene and I are going to take turns reading some bios, and then we'll start the conversation. So I want to welcome back, first of all, Imam Earl El Amin. He has been with us before. Welcome back. He is the resident imam at the Muslim Community Cultural Center of Baltimore and serves as vice president of program development at the National Center on Institutions and Alternatives. For well over 30 years, he has served in various capacities of leadership in the Muslim community, as well as the community at large. His objectives for the Muslim community in Baltimore include the establishment of model neighborhoods, improving the overall image of Islam, interfaith initiatives, and the development of Muslims in business, education, politics, and culture. Eugene.
And then also joining us, we have Reverend Stephen Rambo. Reverend Stephen Rambo serves as the spiritual director at the Centers for Spiritual Living in Simi Valley, California. Reverend Stephen also serves on the Centers for Spiritual Living Regeneration Committee, charged with recruiting emerging leaders into the religious science ministry. Reverend Stephen is an advisor for the Science of Mind Archives and Library Foundation Board and has held various positions on the Centers for Spiritual Living Leadership Council and the Events Committee. Reverend Stephen also participates with numerous interfaith councils and associations. Reverend Stephen Rambo focuses much of his attention on community engagement. He is guided by two models. One, be yourself, because everybody else is taken, and you are the garden, living in a field of infinite possibilities.
Our next guest is the Reverend Viola Abbott. She is currently the settled minister at Coastal Virginia Unitarian Universalists in Virginia Beach, Virginia. She's a member of the Unitarian Universalist Ministers Association Committee on Anti-Racism, Anti-Oppression, and Multiculturalism, and the board of UU Wellspring, Inc., for whom she recently co-authored a spiritual deepening program for youth. Reverend Abbott has also been a contributor to the liturgical materials for the Promise and the Practice of Our Faith campaign in 2018, which was designed to uphold and center the history, perspectives, voices, and leadership of Black Unitarian Universalists.
And then we have the Rabbi Jesse Dressen, who works as the Senior Director for the Jewish Education for Repair the World, an organization that mobilizes Jewish people in their communities to engage in meaningful service as part of an effort to build a more just world. Rabbi Jesse has been working as a community rabbi in Baltimore for almost 10 years, mostly focused on next-gen and non-traditionally engaged or affiliated Jews. Rabbi Jesse works in pursuit of Judaism's three primary goals, as she understands them: personal meaning making, the imperative to be part of a collective, and the responsibility to help make the world a more whole and just place for all its inhabitants.
And finally, we have Mr. Carl Weber. Carl Weber is not a member of the clergy. He is a lay leader in the Episcopal Church. He is a writer and editor who specializes in topics related to politics, business, and social issues. He has co-authored 3 books with Muhammad Yunus, founder of Grameen Bank and winner of the 2006 Nobel Peace Prize, including the New York Times bestseller, Creating a World Without Poverty. He has also worked with other well-known authors, including President Jimmy Carter, sustainability guru Andrew W. Savitz, and White House Press Secretary Scott McClellan, among others. Raised in no faith, Weber was baptized as an Episcopalian in his 20s. In 2015, he helped to found Rivertown's Episcopal Parish's Action on Inclusion and Race, known by the acronym REPAIR, an organization sponsored by 5 churches in Westchester County, New York, that is dedicated to racial justice. And welcome to all of our panelists.
Welcome.
Thank you so much for making time to be with us this afternoon. Thank you for joining us during Eid, Imam. And so let's just start with the first question. What role has religion played in establishing and maintaining racist ideals? And what roles and responsibilities do faith leaders have in dismantling systemic racism? And you can feel free to speak specifically about the history of your specific religious traditions. And no particular order, you all just answer as you will.
But let's not all speak at one time.
Who would like to start?
I guess
No, please.
for me, I think over the last 40 years, I've been actively promoting removing racial images of the divine or the so-called divine. And when we go in various houses of worship, we see imagery that is, in one instance, could be seen as being very offensive to some people, and for some people, they might think that it is correct. I think that has such a profound impact on the practical application of adherence to whatever faith tradition there is. And I think that race, this whole racial imagery has had a profound impact on the applications. I've said it before, what you see is not what you get, what you see is what gets you. And for some people, people of color, to see imagery that is not depicting who they are, it has had a profound impact on asking the question, so where do I fit in? in the scheme of religion, or the image of the divine, so to speak. So that's me.
A colleague of mine and a really incredible teacher in the Jewish world, Lainey Solomon, will always remind us, you can't be it if you can't see it. And that's what I was thinking about, Imam Elamim, as you were speaking. Thank you for including me today. I'm really honored to be here. There's two things that I want to say around the role that faith plays, and specifically as it relates to Judaism and Jewish tradition. One is, I think that as early as the story of Noah and the flood and his 3 sons, we see some sort of acknowledgement of a tiered kind of divinity. I mean, the idea that every human being is created in the image of the divine is stated, and then we see examples as early as this section of the biblical narrative of differentiation of, like, you know, what is ideal and what is less than. And that is something that unfortunately dates back to the very beginning and gets institutionalized over time. I'm most familiar with the way that's happened in Judaism, but I know that it's not just my faith tradition in which we can point to that. The thing that to me, I think is really important to note is that when the Israelites were dispersed from the land of Zion, and they went to different places in Babylonia and built academies, there was a differentiation that happened in those academies of esteeming kind of academic learning in contrast to kind of more tribal engagement with the tradition as it built over generations and over millennia. And there is now in 2021 in the United States of America kind of a reckoning that's happening about what we will call in the Jewish world as the Ashkenormative mindset of what a Jew looks like and who a Jew is. And for those who may not understand what I'm saying, there has been kind of an expansion of that idea that we see in Noah's 3 sons in the world as it has modernized, that like a Jew looks like a person of Eastern European descent that somehow came through, the pogroms and anti-Semitism of Europe, landed in America and other places. And the data tells us that actually about 20% of the American Jewish community are people who are not white and by descent and are not necessarily of that kind of trajectory of dissemination. And so there is work that is really ripe and really rich right now in the landscape of the American Jewish community, and I think so in most faith communities, of how to address the learning and the socialization that has happened through mainstream Jewish education, regardless of what affiliation or level of observance you have, but that kind of decentralizes a monolith of what a Jew looks like and really reclaims the diversity of the Jewish people, of the Erev Rav, the multitude that left Egypt. And so we see it traced back. We've seen the way that the rabbinic systems over the millennia after like the destruction of the temple kind of reinforced sort of this is what a prioritized version of a Jew acts like, and in that has been looks like, and now we're working to address that has never been true, and that there are some real limitations to following the tradition if we don't unpack that and we don't kind of disrupt that.
Let me, I'll chime in now. I really appreciate what Rabbi Jesse and Imam Earl have said about the images of the Jew and of the divine, and about how our traditions need to really rethink the limited visions that we've had of both of those things and create a much more inclusive and all-embracing vision. And that certainly applies to my faith, which is Episcopalianism. But, you know, when it comes to issues of race, the responsibility that my faith tradition bears is a particularly heavy one, because in the United States, it was mainstream Protestant churches like the Episcopal Church that for generations upheld and defended and justified the practice of slavery, and continued in the Jim Crow era and up to today in too many ways to silently acquiesce or to find ways to look away from the issues of racism, and to, in that way, perpetuate systems that put people in unfair categories simply due to the color of their skin or other superficial characteristics. So since we traditionally, and I say we traditionally, in that as an Episcopalian, there's a sense in which I identify with the Episcopalians going back to the 1700s and the people in the South who were owners of plantations and were enslaving their brothers and sisters, and who then went to the Episcopal Church every Sunday morning and thanked God for the privileges that they maintained and viewed them as coming to them by divine right. So there's a sense in which I identify with those folks, even though my own family did not come from those traditions. And like many people on this call, we emigrated to this country in the late 1800s and early 20th century, and therefore did not personally and directly perpetuate slavery, and yet as part of an institution that was enriched by and built in large part on the labor of slave workers, we shared that ongoing responsibility to make change, to dismantle those racist institutions that we continue to benefit from, and to try to spread change throughout our society. So, we bear a heavier responsibility than many of the other people on this panel, and it's something we're grappling with and trying to come to terms with. Something which I'm sure we'll talk about more in the course of this program. But a big part of the responsibility that we bear right now is simply to make it known, to communicate to our fellow Christians and our fellow Episcopalians about the realities of this moral obligation and this moral debt that we owe, to make sure people begin to really think about it and take it seriously and come to understand it. And thankfully, in recent years, there are signs that some of that understanding is beginning to happen, and we're trying to play our small role in spreading that and accelerating it and helping people to take it seriously and to act on it. But the burden of responsibility is very great, and that's something that we're all trying to act out in our own lives.
Thank you.
Wow. Well, thanks, Lane and Eugene, for inviting us all to participate in this. And I see 54 participants, so this is a wave that's moving through our culture, and I love that we're all here. And I just have to echo much of what the Rabbi and Jesse and Imam Earl have been saying. Thank you, Carl. You are a minister of your own right, so I'm going to call you Minister Carl for today. I was thinking about your question from the very start, and something kind of struck me about it. It was, how has religion played a role in building up and maintaining systemic racism in the United States? Religion is just a thing. It's a tool. So is it that religion has done this? No, it's us. It's people, right? It's us that has done it. I think about our forefathers who were people who were inspired to set up these principles, forefathers of this country who were inspired to write these idyllic principles while still being owners of people. I think of the founders of AA who were drunks, but were inspired to develop the 12 steps, which have grown into being principles of life for many people all around the world, no matter what their malady may be. So religion as a tool was just reflecting what the great example, as we say in our teaching. And we're kind of new on the block. I was sitting here listening to the rabbi tell the story of Noah and thinking about the Imam and the story of Ishmael and his and Abraham, and we Ernest Holmes wrote his book in 1917. We're kids in the terms of science of mind and its religious background, but we rely heavily on all the faith traditions, and the one that comes to mind is, "It is done unto you as you believe." And so it's how we have believed that has that has built up and maintained the system, right? Systemic racism, and is now how we are believing today that is breaking it down and changing it so much so. So I don't want to point the finger or be apologetic for religion or for any of our past, but I also don't want to slam religion as being responsible. It's us, and we must take the responsibility. And I see 55 people here on the screen who are taking that responsibility. So it's about digging in to the text, digging into the words, knowing thyself, challenging what we see, and being critical thinkers, and not taking anybody else's beliefs for the truth, but taking that thing that's here, that spark of divinity that sings to our soul, that says, this doesn't feel right. And then we can dive into our sacred text and find out why that feeling in our heart is showing up. And we will look at our sacred text and find the answers many times. So I don't want to slam the religion, but I do want to slam us for the opportunity to no longer maintain the systemic situation.
Thank you also for allowing me to be here, Lane and Eugene, and to be with all of these wonderful people this afternoon. And I have to say that Reverend Stephen Rambo, what you say is loaded with truth. I am in the Unitarian Universalist denomination, which actually has deep roots in Christianity, although some of us might deny that. And the lessons that we learn in religion, in religious community, are passed down to us, even some of the implicit ones that we aren't even aware of. And I came to Unitarian Universalism because I considered myself a very progressive Christian, but I couldn't really, I had difficulty reconciling with a lot of the things that were in the Bible, again, because of the critical reading that's required. And I think depending on your own interpretation of sacred texts. I grew up with stories that justified the subjugation of people of color. We supposedly had the mark of Cain on us, which was what entitled us to be treated so poorly. And that we were all descended from Ham, who was cursed. And Rabbi Jesse Dressen talked about a little bit about what that was. And there are many other stories throughout that have been used to solidify the oppression of Black people and people of color. But it does require engaging in critical thinking to address what's in these sacred texts. And very few of them make references to the specific color of people. So the question is, how does that happen? And it happens because of us. And it's how we interpret it. And whether or not we take to heart the people who are interpreting it. Literacy is a wonderful thing. And there was a reason why folks didn't want others to be reading the Bible or other sacred texts, and why some of that wisdom was held by the elite, because if people believe a thing, they can do unbelievable things in the name of it. So religion has that power. What do religious leaders have to do? Because you kind of threw two questions in there. Is that the same roles that all of us have, right? All of us are responsible for looking at the systems of oppression and trying to do what we can to dismantle it. I think religious leaders, because they're more visible, probably have a greater responsibility. But we're often in the position of having to call these things out, sometimes lovingly and sometimes not, and showing how our perpetuation of racist systems, by even doing nothing about them, is incongruous with living a life of faith.
Thank you for that, guys. Thank you so much. Reverend Eugene, I'm going to ask, would you ask a follow-up question?
Yeah. The follow-up question is this. Each of you are here because you have an interest in racial justice. So can you share some of the actions you have taken or are taking to promote anti-racist ideas and activism in your faith communities?
Well,
Whoever wants to dive in.
I'm happy to tackle that one first. Everybody's being very polite and deferring to their neighbor, which is a generous spirit. But I'll talk a little bit about that. So I'm here and very honored to be included in this distinguished panel because of my involvement with the organization, which Lane described. Rivertown's Episcopal Parish's Action on Inclusion and Race is Repair, and it was founded in the spring of 2015. And at that time, you know, if you think back, that was shortly after the killing of Eric Garner. There were a couple of other very similar incidents at that time, which were, you know, very distressing and upsetting to many of us. And at that time, we were going through what we Christians call the season of Lent, preparing for Easter. And it's a time of sort of solemn reflection on one's sins and looking deeply at oneself in preparation for you know, what we view as the climactic story of the Bible, which is the resurrection of Jesus and the salvation that we feel it brings to all humans. So during the season of Lent, we often have educational programs which are designed to help us look more deeply into ourselves and how we can change our lives to be more in tune with the Christian values that we say we believe in. And at that time, several of the clergy in Westchester County, here where I live, got together and said, you know, we need to do something about race. This is an issue that has been the besetting sin of American society for so long, and we need to start taking it more seriously. Why don't we pull together a Lenten series of education about race? And one day, the minister in our church, a lovely woman named Nora Smith, called me up and said, Carl, I'm going to have to miss this week's committee meeting of our clergy committee putting together this program on race. Would you take my place? And that's how I got involved in what ultimately transformed into Repair, because we pulled together a series of gatherings at each of our churches to talk about race relations in this country and the realities of racism and the role that we Christians have played in perpetuating it. And after several sessions with the Lenten season ending, group of us who were there in the room together, 30 or 40 of us, said, you know, this has been too valuable to stop. We need to keep going. We turned it into Repair, which has become a group that meets every month. Now in the time of COVID, we've been meeting virtually, and we've been getting attendance between 30 and 100 people, mostly lay people of various backgrounds, to talk about every possible aspect of race relations and what we can do as individuals and as members of our church communities to improve the way we treat one another and the way our society treats one another. It's been an incredibly powerful educational experience for many of us, including especially me. The degree to which I have learned the realities of race in our society and to really understand what my brothers and sisters of different backgrounds have lived through has been fantastic. And I'll just mention one important reason why this is true, is that the 5 churches that sponsor our Repair organization come from different towns here in Westchester, which are quite different demographically. I happen to live in Irvington, New York, beautiful little suburban town, which I think has a African-American population of like 1.5%. A couple of the other churches come from Ossining, where the Black population is, I'm actually looking over at my list here, is 13%, and Hispanic population is 47%. The beauty of Repair is that it brings us all together so that people who are white and live in all white communities get to ask questions of and hear stories from and share experiences with Black and Hispanic and people from all kinds of other backgrounds. And the degree to which we've developed a greater empathy and an understanding and appreciation for what we've all lived through has been amazing and profound. So just being in the room together has made a big difference, but even more has been having, you know, experts, authors, and others come and share their deep expertise about racial injustice and about things that we can do to overcome that has been tremendously important. So we're going to continue to meet every month for as long as, as far into the future as I can imagine. The people who've been part of Repair found it to be tremendously meaningful. And I think, you know, it's a small step, but it's one that's been very important for the group of us. And we keep looking to find ways to increase our influence. So it's been one of the things that has been most important to me in the ongoing development of my faith. And I'm just really grateful to have an opportunity like today to share the good news of the kinds of things that can be done when people want to learn from one another.
Thank you. Who wants to jump in?
I think one of the things that was just said was so important is there has to be a will there. And once there is a will there to learn from one another, then we can, then that becomes beneficial. Overall here in the city of Baltimore, we've maintained some very good interfaith relationships over the last 35 years. And race has been at, you know, at the forefront in our conversations and resolving certain things and learning from other people. In our tradition, it says that there are 3 ways that you know a person: you live with him, you work with them, and you travel with them. And I've added a 4th one, and you eat with them. And that it's very important that, you know, the human being is a social creature by their very nature. And so it's very important that people have to engage one another if they have the desire to engage one another, so that they may come out better. If you don't rub up against anything, nothing comes, nothing comes to life. So that, and there has to be some friction when that happens also. And years ago, I remember everything was kumbaya. You know, we came out feeling good, but we never really dealt with. We didn't get to the root of it. And so over time, and I think in the last two and 2.5 years, we're seeing that people are becoming much more open as from the heart, and they're listening better, and they're disseminating what they believe or what they think better. And so I'm seeing this. I think it's like I forget who said there's 56 people on this, and that's a great thing. So we have to look at how we move incrementally towards establishing as I say, a race-free society.
I'll jump in. I like these little catchy phrases from the ancient wisdom teachers. Know thyself. What a powerful phrase. What a powerful idea that Hermes Trismegistus gave us. Know thyself. It's some hard, add your own expletive, delete it there. That's hard to dive into that, but in terms of my own personal journey, I was told in ministerial school our job is to comfort the afflicted and to afflict the comfortable. And so that's what we've been doing in our own community. It started with the, Garner and Michael Brown and Trayvon Martin, and in our community, Simi Valley, it has a very strange national history because that was the scene of the Rodney King trial. Now, people believe that the Rodney King event happened in Simi Valley. It did not. It was a jurisdictional change, and the trial took place there. But it put a spotlight on that community, and that spotlight they took to heart. the rest of the world identified and left its stasis in time, but the community itself said, ooh, we need to look at ourselves. And my particular communities, Center for Spiritual Living Simi Valley, has dived deep into that work. We've done a lot of work on white privilege, racial inclusion. We're creating Jedi warriors. And I love that, the Jedi thing. It's justice, equity, diversion, and inclusion. And so we're diving into that. It's been interesting. I remember after one session, after working with some of the writings of on privilege, one of the members said, "You know, I just feel so awake from this, inspired. I just want to run out to the next Black man I see and hug him." I was like, "Whoa, let's just take a step back. That might be just a little too far to go. But how about if you just acknowledge and bless and let that person not be invisible to you? Let's try not to speak from race doesn't matter to me. I don't care what color person is. Yes, you do care. You know, you don't believe you care in difference, then just go to the store and pick up the first peach that you see at the counter. Nobody does that. Everybody looks over all the peaches. You might squeeze a couple avocados before you take one. Difference matters. And it's important. And so what I try to do is help people remember that, and remember that God is in love with novelty and diversion and diversity. And so we need to be in love with that, and not homogenize our experience of life, because it's the diversity of the forest that makes it beautiful. It's all the flowers in the garden that make the garden look so fantastic. And so we need to learn to appreciate that, and always see what I try to teach and help others to see is the other is simply another. The other is simply another. So the last thing I'll say, and I'll turn it back over to a lot of the people here, is you know, we create all the boundaries. Boundaries don't exist. Right now on your screen, if you're in gallery mode, you might be looking at my face, but you can see the other screens around. You can probably see where your computer is sitting. You might even see the room around that. But we focus on what boundaries we want to make. And so what I try to help people do is to expand the boundaries of what they see.
I have to say, my journey to ministry kind of arose out of having to address some of the racial issues, having been a Unitarian Universalist. And I will say, one of the things that sometimes I would tell my son when he was little, if you don't like what I cook, get in the kitchen, right? So that thinking has in part fueled my call. I think that each of us as religious leaders bring our personal experiences with us when we engage with communities. And I think that informs not everything that I do, but a lot of what I do from the pulpit and when I engage with others. I've participated in work that's aimed at looking at some of the racial inequities in our denomination and trying to come up with ways to bring them to light and let people know about them. The beauty is my congregation has been doing a lot of that work, and I'm new to this congregation. I'm one of those people who actually moved to a totally different area in the middle of a pandemic. So I'm still learning all of the things about where I am. But this church that I'm the minister of, they regularly host a workshop called the Pledge to End Racism, which is also open to members of the community. And they use curriculum that was created by the first Unitarian Universalist Church in Richmond, which is based on work that was done in Alabama. So, and it's really wonderful curriculum, and it gets people to engage in difficult discussions. But I think part of what is really what I try to do, and sometimes it's very difficult, is to keep people engaged. Because if people cease to be engaged, people are already polarized around the issue of race. And if you can't keep people engaged and talking in relationship, really, it's kind of hard to do the work. And I say that because we don't do work we don't care about. And that's just the long and the short of it. So for us to be in right relation and engagement with each other is important, to get to know one another, because if we don't know one another, we don't know our stories. And I think stories are really important. And we learn a lot through them. Even you get the pedagogy in there without having to, make people think they're working hard. And I think that our lives are stories, and just sharing them with people, our lived experiences make all the difference in the world. So, yeah.
I want to speak about two kind of lanes that I'm in my work, both with my local community in Baltimore and with a national position for an organization that works with young people to serve in ways that also I teach towards the root causes and try to do its work through an anti-racist lens. And before I do that, I want to just say real quickly, I'm the child of two New York Jews that grew up in Virginia where there were no Jews. And actually my earliest experience of seeing peers who were proud to be people of faith were my friends who belonged to Chantilly Baptist Church. And Miss Nelson, the youth group advisor, was my next door neighbor. And every Sunday they would welcome me to be a part of what felt like Sunday afternoon play with all my friends. And I learned in that space that there were a lot of things that as a Jew I had in common with people whose parents came from a different background and a different place of motivation than I did, that they wanted their children to all be proud of who they are and where they came from, to know their story, as Reverend Abbott spoke about, and to marry someone like themselves. And I didn't realize that the person who was the first model for me of being a proud person of faith was also the child of a civil rights activist, a member of Wyoming's Black 14 in 1969, who got kicked off of the football team because he banded with his brothers and said, we want to speak up for racism and use our platform of the football field to do so. And they said, no, thanks. And while he went on to have a very successful football career, I didn't realize how lucky I was to have peers and friends who were descendants of that legacy of working towards justice and being proud Black people at a young age. But it was definitely a part of my foundation for my own personal religious and spiritual journey. And then I arrived in Baltimore as an adult, which is a hyper-segregated city. It is a city that has a lot of work to do to address the kind of winds of white supremacy that seek to keep white presenting Jews, because not all Jews are white, as I've said, and Black people from mobilizing together and working towards their shared goals of safety and security. That is a function and a manifestation of white supremacy. And I do a lot of work in my local community to help find that space. Reverend Abbott also mentioned this about, if you push people over the edge, then they're not going to engage, right? So if my first reaction as a white presenting Jew, when someone talks to me about systemic racism, is to say, well, Jews aren't white, that's a great starting place, but you have to kind of disrupt that, and you have to kind of challenge that, and you have to, as Reverend Rambo said, like, expand the conversation of what we're talking about, because if both racism and anti-Semitism are a manifestation of white supremacy, there are things we can do together that we cannot do apart. And that is part of like the covenantal model, right? God and like the people, whoever and however you name your God and whoever you identify as your people, have a relationship in which there is an assumption that they don't have the same roles to play, but they are seeking to accomplish something in sacred partnership that would be impossible if they didn't come together. And that's kind of how I approach my understanding of work as a white Jew and a white leader in the Jewish community to address racism. I will say that the first 2 weeks after George Floyd was murdered, I was really frustrated and upset for all the reasons that should be obvious, but also because I didn't understand why 5 years after Freddie Gray was murdered, just a few miles down the street from where I'm currently sitting, the same kind of like moment of reckoning that I saw my local Jewish community starting to engage with after George Floyd was killed, like didn't happen after Freddie Gray was killed in our own city. And then I realized that it would be like really unproductive to get stuck in that, but to actually just kind of ride that wave. And during those first few weeks and first few months after George Floyd's death, I got a lot of calls from colleagues and from community members who kind of said to me, I know I need to get more involved. I know I need to do something. By the way, I don't know anybody that is, I don't have any relationship with anybody who's Black. I live in this hyper segregated city. So locally, we've been doing work to try and build relationships, to try and create opportunities for people to serve together and to encounter and to learn together with one another. Because if we're going to create relationships at that place that has previously been siloed, we have a lot of work to do in our own spaces while also creating like intention and equity in how we build those spaces for encounters. So that is a part of the local work. I work for an organization though that sees engagement in meaningful service and volunteering as something that they do. And it is impossible not to like be aware of the slippery slope of white saviorism that can come with when you serve and when you engage in volunteerism. So we work with a model that we call Jewish service learning, and we pair all of our service with learning that seeks to both show like the fact that Judaism and the Torah has commanded us to be involved in work that is just, in work that does not silo like the particular identities from those who are part of like broader humanity, and to try and like also do the work through a lens of anti-racism and equity with the right partners to help us do that, so that we can kind of enter into relationships in a way, again, that like has balance to it and has this kind of covenantal view of work we can do together if we want our cities and we want like our country to be better off, and to disrupt some of the patterns that, you know, are constantly in need of unlearning and disrupting in largely white communities of like, I have something to give that someone else can't provide for themselves, because that's just false. It's not true. And so a lot of the curriculum work that we do and a lot of the programming and community building work that we do at Repair the World, which predominantly works with people under the age of 40, is to kind of tap into the trends, attitudes, and behaviors and expectations that generation already has, that we should already be working towards building a more just and equitable world, and to figure out how to strengthen and deepen the approach to that work through a lens of tradition, through a lens of values, and through engaging in partnerships where we are not prescribing the work until we come together and we think about what our shared goals are and how we want to work towards them in partnership.
Thank you, Rabbi Dressen. I want to actually go back to what Imam El-Amin had said a few minutes ago about the kumbaya kind of syndrome, because I know that still really exists. I know that I have people in my communities, my white friends, who really just like, why does everything have to be about race? Why do we have to keep talking about race? Why, you know? And I'm just like, because it does, because it's important, because it's, you know, and I have a hard time finding the words. And I too was raised Unitarian, and have done, you know, dabbled in a lot of different religious practices, and absolutely love them all because they're all valuable. And what is true is that even the most liberal congregations are struggling to have these conversations about race and privilege and social justice even, but really, you know, race and privilege. So I wanted to see if you have any take on that. Like, how How are the efforts, you know, you said you do a lot of interfaith work in Baltimore City, and I know you do. What are you hearing from the people in your congregations? What are you hearing from your fellow faith leaders about the work that you are doing? And is it a struggle? What are you encountering?
And I also want to add that I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead, Eugene.
Just real fast. And I also want to say that that's just not only addressed to the imam, but to everyone else as well.
No, to everyone. I just wanted to start with him. I also wanted to acknowledge, let me also acknowledge the chat is very active. People are sharing some of the greatest things that they have been doing.
Good stuff.
Thank you for sharing that. And we will, if we don't get to every question, please don't take it personally. But we are paying attention. Go for it, Imam.
I think for me, and speaking with the congregation, it is what it's supposed to be. It is supposed to be a struggle. If it wasn't a struggle, then it wouldn't be worth it. But as I said before, we're seeing that there is a more receptivity to the not just the conversation, but also to the like I said, live, work, and travel, but to activities that engage people. When people work together, then you get to know them better. So those types of things, just, you know, we started out 30 years ago sitting around a table. Now we're working on different things together, different activities that would improve the quality of life for individuals. And so when you that spirit that folks get into helps them along the way, rather than just sitting around articulating something all the time. It's only going to go but so far.
What are some of those concrete things, if you don't mind me asking?
I mean, you start out feeding the homeless. You start working together in mentoring programs. You start working together. You start working together in neighborhood cleanups. You start working together in all of those types of activities, which bring people together, in understanding what the role is for this. I think Rabbi, you said something that I wrote down. You said white savior. That's something that's very, very important. That we have to come in with a balance and people understanding that they're not, you're not a savior, but you're coming in on equal footing. You're coming in to learn also, to take back, to disseminate also. But so those activities that we're dealing with, I mean, people come to the mosque all the time. We have interfaith activities pre-COVID. And so, but those types of activities, people just people leaving out of there, just sitting around and eating with one another and people were telling me from the Jewish community, people were telling me from the Catholic community, hey, I really enjoyed that because the personal stories started to kick in, as Reverend Abbott talked about. When people start talking about their personal stories, their personal journeys, people start over food. People start feeling good about those things, and then they open up, their hearts seem to open up a little more. But it's a struggle, and it's supposed to be a struggle because people have these preconceived notions that they've been given, and they just, until they interact with folk, then they come alive.
Thank you, Imam. Let me ask you also, let me go to Carl, because there was a question in the chat earlier, Carl. Someone wanted to know what are some of the specific things that Repair has done or is doing other than bringing people together for conversation. Mm-hmm. Are there actual projects that you're collaborating on, and how are those being received?
Right. Yeah, very good. Those are both very good questions. And the question about the reaction in the parish and in the community to our efforts is a very important one. And as the Imam said, yes, it's a struggle, and it's very much a mixed bag. We have people in our church, for example, in my church in Irvington, New York, many parishioners are very supportive and very proud of what Repair is doing. You also are always going to encounter some people who say the kind of thing that you were quoting earlier, Elaine. Oh, why does everything have to be about race? Why do we have to keep talking about that? You do encounter that. But on the other hand, there are times when I'm pleasantly surprised by someone that I would have thought was, they're kind of conservative, they're kind of old school, they probably have no use for what we're talking about. And then they'll say something that makes me realize, oh, they've begun to move a little bit in the right direction. Sometimes, I think in some communities of faith, particularly in an affluent suburb like Westchester County, it'll be the older, more conservative, and more well-heeled individuals who are most reluctant to grapple with issues of race or to admit any responsibility for racial injustice. And that's a problem because they may be the people who are some of the biggest donors and supporters of the church. So your faith leaders are in a very ticklish situation because, yes, they're there to tell truth to power. And yet if they offend too many of the people on whom the church's income is dependent, that can have real serious repercussions on their life and career. So I admire religious leaders who have the courage to be bold in talking about the truth to their congregations. And there are times when it really pays off. So for example, last year when in Irvington, our church co-sponsored our first ever Juneteenth celebration. A huge chunk of the cost, it was all pulled together very quickly within a week or two, band and food stands and speakers. It was a wonderful community event, and it was all pulled together very quickly. And a huge chunk of the expense was paid for by a member of our congregation who was one of those wealthy Wall Street types that I would have assumed would be on the other side of the fence. And yet he said, this is exciting what we're doing here. I want to give to support it. In terms of activities beyond education that Repair does, we do, I would say education, learning from experts and leaders about to understand race relations is at the heart of what Repair does. But we do try in every meeting to inform our members about activities that they can get involved in, and most of them do. So for example, we had a program earlier this year about police reform, very live issue in New York because the governor of New York required every police department in the state to come up with a plan for reform to have greater respect for and fairness in treatment of minority members. So we had local experts talking about how police reform is unfolding in our communities and told everybody in the room, here's how you can get involved in your community. Let your feelings be known by your local community leaders, and things like that are having a cumulative impact. So in effect, what we're doing is arming our people with information that things they can individually do, and most of them are engaged in doing that in their own towns.
Thank you, Carl. Can I just ask Reverend Rambo, when I met Eugene now over a year ago, one of the things that he engaged me in was a panel discussion. And what was being talked about a little bit was the efforts to actually take work outside the walls of the church. So in Centers for Spiritual Living, talking about that there was even some resistance there to doing, and Eugene, I'm probably messing up this conversation, but I've never forgotten it. So there was some resistance to doing some work and shaking it up a little bit. And I just wondering what your take is on that. Because I know in Simi Valley, California, it sounds like you're really making a lot of progress.
Well, we're making some progress. I wouldn't go with a lot of progress because as Imam says, it's a struggle. And a lot of people are just not willing to deal with the struggle. The challenge that is had so frequently in our country, in our culture, in our community particularly, is that thing called privilege. Some of us cannot escape, and others can. It's a choice for many people to be involved in this work. And when you have the option to opt out, they do. So I see my role is to keep reminding people that others do not have the option to opt out. And so your ability to even ask the question, why do we have to keep talking about this, is an indication that we must keep talking about it, because you have you have the option to ask that question. Some people cannot ask that question. So yeah, there's some resistance, but it's built in. I mean, everyone has that resistance. All of you right now, try this. Take your hands and fold your fingers together. You know, all right, now flip them and fold them. And doesn't that feel weird? That's what we're asking people to do with their whole life. And it's very hard to stay this way. Most of you either unhooked your hands or you went back to this way. We are creatures of habit. So I try to help people do simple things, like drive a different way to work, buy a different brand of cereal. Some people have to start small. But yeah, it is a struggle. But the thing is to recognize that it's going to be a struggle and give people options to grow, because as it is, you know, we're lifting weights, and some people are going to have to work with 5-pound consciousness weights, and some people have to work with 10-pound consciousness weights. And it's our job to make it okay for all of them to do what they do, because you know what? It's not going to be a whole thing. I mean, if we were to sit here and talk about people that have shifted and changed the world, we're going to do a lot of one-name people: Nelson Mandela, Mahatma Gandhi, Mother Teresa, Jesus, the Buddha. It's one person, one person, one person, one person. It's not like a group of people. Nobody says the Jews changed the world, although they really did, because they wrote an incredible book that we're still reading every day. I don't call it the Old Testament. I call it the Hebrew Bible. It's pretty recent. We use it all the time, so, but for the most part, what I'm saying, I think is a truism. It's going to be one by one by one by one by one until it's a whole bunch, until you get the 51%, and then everything shifts. So it's just letting people be okay with the little bit of progress that they can make. Does that make sense?
Thank you. Yeah, no, thank you. I love those analogies. They're really cool. I love that Seja also was inspired to say she chooses the struggle when she understands the value, which is a response to what you were saying, and that's wonderful. So I want Eugene to ask a follow-up question, but I want to talk to Reverend Abbott for a second, because as a fellow Unitarian, I know that in the long legacy of social justice work, and it's a surprise among some of us that there is any resistance to having conversations about race and privilege. And having said that I also found out that Unitarians are among the most well-heeled of all parishes. So yeah, I guess there's no question there. I just want to give you the entree to have that conversation, and then we'll move on.
Right. Well, the reality is, I mean, we've been hearing about struggle a lot so far, and it is true. These things are hard for people. I think it's important to lift up that it is hard, and that shouldn't be an unusual thing. I mean, you want to be ripped and have a six-pack, you got to do a lot of sit-ups. That's not easy either, right? So I think it's important to remind people of that. But I think the other thing that has been the plague of many UUs is that by and large, we consider ourselves very exceptional, and we're not. We're like everybody else. And we have all the same struggles that everybody has. And right now we're in the midst of a lot of pushback over this whole race thing. And it's really incredible. And for some folks, it has broken a lot of hearts. In 2017, the UUA put together the Commission on Institutional Change to look at systemic racism in our denomination. They published this in Power Structure, and they published this report last year, and it set everybody's hair on fire. The people who had a problem with some of the things that were in there. And I think we've seen this also in society. I mean, think about this, not to talk about politics, but we see analogies everywhere. For many years, I lived in New York, and I lived in New York City. And what happened after for those of you who did, what happened after Mayor Jenkins, we had this huge blowback. And we ended up with a really incredible and intense police state in New York City. What happened after Obama? We had this really huge blowback. because people are uncomfortable with change. I'm gonna steal this from you, Reverend Rambo. I really liked it because it's, these things make us uncomfortable, and it's sad, but it's true. And that's sometimes part of the thing I talk about, is that yes, we say all these wonderful things about ourselves, but some of the UUs held in the highest esteem historically were people who did not think highly of Black people and people of color. So there's a lot of stuff that I think UUs have to come to terms with in terms of their own spiritual tradition. And just this year at General Assembly, a statement of conscience, and it's our annual gathering, a statement of conscience was passed by the delegates asking the association and UUs as individuals and in their congregations and other, kind of affiliated groups to actively engage in undoing systemic white supremacy and all of its manifestations. And we don't even realize we're so attuned to it. We're not attuned to it, but it is so pervasive that we don't even realize it's there. And I like to tell people a story about, I thought I grew up in a very permissive, liberal kind of environment. And it wasn't until I went to another country that was run predominantly by people of color. And I didn't go as a tourist. I went with people who lived there. So I was like hanging out with the folks. I came home and I saw things I had never seen before. So when they say it is in it's in the air that we breathe, it is so true. And you know that you keep breathing a bad smell long enough, after a while you don't smell it anymore and you don't even realize it's there. And that is really how white supremacist culture is. And it's just a hard conversation for people to have. So I don't know if that answered your question the way you would have liked it to have been answered, Lane, but that's kind of.
No, indeed, no. That's fine. That's fine. Eugene, are you up? I hear you said you have a storm going on. Okay,
yeah, there's a
great.
storm going here, and it's playing around with the power here, but it's okay. But that brings us, Reverend Viola, to this next question, right? And this is for the panelists as well, the rest of these beautiful people. What advice can you give to those of us who would like to start an inclusive conversations in our own faith communities and either don't know how to begin or have encountered resistance?
I'm going to jump in on that right away. I okay, I'm going to breathe through this. I'm going to say, don't do it. I'm going to say, don't start anything. Start with yourself. It's really important that each of us do our own individual work. I'm reading, some of you may be familiar with this. I'm reading My Grandmother's Hands. And when I first, way to go. So when I first started it, I thought, oh my God, I got to do a workshop on this book. And then I ended up having an opportunity to take a class with Resmaa Menakem, the author. It's about 250 people in this group. He's divided the group up into bodies that identify as racialized as Black, racialized as white, separate racialized as indigenous, all different cultures separated out. And it's helping me to understand how important it is to dive into some material and work it for ourselves. And then we will attract the right situation for moving forward next. The worst thing in the world is to go in half-baked, not fully understanding, and a novice diving into something that is systemic, institutionalized. The system that we are living in is not broken. It's not broken. It's working. exactly as it was supposed to work. And until we can truly understand that, if we go into this work thinking we're going to fix something, we're pushing that rock up the hill. It's not going to work that way. It's going to work when we understand where we are and our own individual biases, our own individual traps. And then the next thing will automatically, by divine emergence, come into your field of view, and you will know right here what your next step is. But only if you do your own work. That would be my thing to say. Don't be too anxious.
I want to build on that.
And let me just say, Rabbi, before you get going, I just wanted to remind the panel that our time is growing short. So we've got about, it's 9 minutes to complete this portion of the program. Just wanted to put that out there. Go right ahead, Rabbi.
I was gonna just add one quick thing to what Reverend Rambo just said, and then say something as a white person on the panel, because I just want to speak to those who also are here today who identify as white and or white presenting. I could not agree more with Reverend Rambo's, like, our internal work to sustain the external work is directly in correlation, and we will burn out. We will not be able to do this work. And once we accept that this work existed long before any of us were born and will exist long after any of us depart this world, gives a sort of permission to not try and accomplish the work, but to try and be a part of the work that needs to be done. And for better or for worse, there's so much of it that there are different ways to tap in and different ways to get in a lane to be part of that work, and to humble yourself that you are just one part of something that is not just bigger than you, but it is bigger in time and space than any of us. I want to go back to the idea about choice and about those of us who have the privilege of choice, and specifically as the white people here. And that is, at some point, a decision to forego the idea that this is a choice, and to have to recommit to that every single day, and to do that in an intentional way, because it's too easy. I think it was Reverend Abbott that said about, like, the complicit nature of just not doing anything. It's very easy to do that. And the last thing that I will say, just to keep it brief, is there is a continuum of acts that have the potential to transform what is just in this world. And in Judaism, we talk about acts of loving kindness. Then we talk about acts to repair the world. It's funny to be on a call where when we talk about repair, we're referring to something else. I've been amused by that this whole, and that I use Bobby Harrow's cycles of socialization and cycles of liberation that I will put into the chat if anyone's unfamiliar with it. And I think acts of loving kindness and even acts towards repairing the world fit very nice programmatically into Jewish engagement and into bringing people together, and don't necessarily necessitate the consideration of the frameworks and the systems that are offering those, and whether ultimately they need to change in order to move to the more liberating part of the tradition, which is justice and the pursuit of something that might bring about redemption. And that's where you get into considering, does my board have the diversity and representation that it needs? Is there equity between those who are getting compensated at the highest levels and the lowest levels? And do we need to reconsider the systems and the frameworks that we are working within in order to deliver these opportunities of acts and loving kindness and repairing the world's brokenness in a way that will also ask us to, white people, forego some of the things that have been privileged to us in order to make a more equitable distribution across the board. And a lot of times, those who sit at the table to make those decisions have the privilege to not make them in a way that will redistribute things that will never happen otherwise. And I see that as a unique thing that those of us who are white really need to acknowledge, we really need to know, and we really need to reconsider how we stand up to that commitment so that we reject that privilege that is too easy to allow us to just kind of like sidestep the conversation when it gets difficult or when it gets challenging.
I would the question you had asked about beginning a program, and I would go back with what was stated. Look, some years ago, I used to run groups for young men, right, to pass these programs, and we used to sit around in a circle, and I used to give them an assignment, and the assignment was, tomorrow, speak to everyone that you see. Just say good morning, hello, peace, whatever. And the question a young man asked me, he says, well, what am I doing? Why should I do that? I said, so because I want you to get in the habit of doing what you're supposed to do. So when people ask me the same question that was asked, I do the same. I tell people all the time, just start speaking to everyone that you see and say good morning, hello. And, you know, because we become such a cold society now. We look each other in the eye and walk past one another. So just start, if you want to start doing something, as was stated, it'll open up to you once you start doing those little small things and what you're supposed to do, then everything will start opening up. But sometimes we want to get into this thing where we want to do, I want to get in, we want to, because an incident has occurred, now all of a sudden we want to respond to the stimuli. That's not the way this works. It works like it was stated, that people have been doing this for ad infinitum. And they've been doing this work, but it's a natural expression, and until you find a natural expression within yourself, it's not going to happen. We just can't keep responding to the stimuli. This is how America works. It makes you respond to the stimuli all the time instead of being proactive, because proactivity will bring out the natural you. It'll bring out what is placed within you. It'll bring it out for you. But once we keep responding to the stimuli, we're not going to get far. We're not going to get far at all.
And I would say that what everyone has already said is pretty wonderful and awesome. But as a UU, I always go back to covenant. And I think that we need to have an idea about how we want to engage and be in relationship with each other. We're going to encounter resistance in this work, and we're going to encounter interrupters, which is another thing totally. But it's important to remember that this is long haul work. Yes, it's important, as Reverend Rambo said, to do your own work, but don't shirk from an opportunity to engage with someone who is doing something that is problematic, and address it and deal with it. And that's where the covenant comes in, about an agreement about how you're going to, even if it's what you say to yourself about how you're going to engage with other people. Hopefully you will have other people in your religious community as a start who will be in covenant with you. And then the other thing that I always have to bring this back to, and if you're in a faith community, right? The question is, what does your faith call you to do? Okay. So you need to think really about what it is that you believe in. And is that in line? Is that in agreement with what you're doing? And I think that can be the baseline for many things, at least in religious community, to get people to think about what it is they're doing and how to change for the better and go from here to here.
And like the others who've spoken, I agree with so much of what's been said, especially about the importance of doing the work on yourself and the importance of thinking about how you relate to the people around you on a daily basis. Tremendously important. I would also add, though, that for some of us and some of our communities, it's very easy on a daily basis to only encounter people who look the same as you and who think the same as you. And so there actually is and can be a benefit to going out of your way to make opportunities to encounter people that, maybe your parents taught you to be afraid of, and actually getting to know them and sharing your story with them and their story with you. And suddenly you find that you're relating to the world around you in a slightly different way. So taking some steps to get out of your comfort zone can also be important and necessary. And I'll just finally say, by the way, Rabbi, when we called our group Repair, we were very consciously stealing a page from the spiritual wisdom of our older brothers and sisters in Judaism. But of course, that's what we Christians do all the time, is steal the best from what you have taught us over the centuries. So thank you for that.
I love that. Thank you, Carl, for that transparency. That's awesome. So we're gonna close this out. There are a couple of people asked a couple of things. I think one of them that we just pretty much may have answered, which was how do we avoid doing a spiritual bypass on this work? You know, how do we make sure that we embrace it as ours and not kind of pass it on or think we're above it? The other is, what do we have to offer folks who are afraid of losing power and therefore want to opt out of these conversations? Any advice for people who are asking those questions?
That's a tough one.
Well, that's why I saved it for last, Imam, so you could start.
No, I'll defer to my colleagues on that one. What? Say it again.
What do we have to offer? What do we have to offer folks who are afraid of losing power and therefore want to opt out of these conversations?
Well, one of the things is you have to redefine what power really is. And so in a society that we live in, you know, what is power in certain other flourishing civilizations historically weren't the same. And so we live in a society right now where, you know, power is basically around material acquisitions. So the individual has to be seen, you know, it's like a guy just flew out in space. These two guys just went up in space, you know, that they really could have solved the world's problems of hunger. But with their arrogant selves, they went out in space just to say I went out in space. So those people that at that level, and even not at that level, because those guys are at the top of the chain, but the people that think that they have power, in many instances, they find out that they don't. There's a situation or a circumstance that occurs that they find out that they really don't have power, that the power does not reside within them as they think. And sometimes that has to happen to them naturally. We can't, I mean, all we can do is give a definition of what power is, but it has to happen naturally to them. You know, they lose something that they really coveted, really financially. And so then all of a sudden it starts kicking in that hey man, I'm not what I thought I really was. I'm not that powerful.
Well, that's the point anyway, right? I mean, if they actually had power, they wouldn't be afraid of losing it. I mean, so, you know, I mean, Jason said, is it the power, is power the ability to act, or is it power over? And I think, you know, Adine was just asking, you know, what do we offer them and to have them come to the table?
We live in a society where there are people who make great wealth from feeding the sense of fear and anger in other people. And so that's a hard thing to fight against. But I would say when it comes to communicating with people who are afraid of losing power, we in the world of faith can't offer them a route to power, but we can offer them a way to stop living a life of fear.
That's beautiful.
Well said.
That was very well said.
And I think a part of that, if I could, just speaks to what is their understanding of community and the world in which they live. I think one of the things that we've seen, I know I've seen in conversations I've had with people, that there are some people that have no clue about how other people live.
Right.
No clue whatsoever. And sometimes when they achieve that understanding, that changes how they move in the world. So a lot of this, again, go back to it's education, but it's also relationship and communication. Unfortunately, so many of us travel in circles where we're not, you know, engaging with people who aren't in the same little bubble that we're in. But that's really, really the way. I mean, we could talk about it on a really abstract level about these guys who went into space, but I really don't know that they get that people have to work 3 jobs just to pay rent and food and take care of their children. I think that is like so beyond their understanding that, of course, going to the moon it will be the moon next, going into outer space and not ending world hunger, which they could do, is not a thing for them. So it's about raising people's level of consciousness about these things. That's a long haul. That's a struggle. But yeah.
Yeah, I think there's also, I know we're trying to wrap up here, but I think there's also so much what Viola does with stories. There's so much we can get from analogy and stories. And I'm just thinking about, the energy in a ball stadium when when your team is winning, when you feel, for helping people understand the energy of collective power and how that feels versus the energy of individualized power. There's some, I know we don't have time to unpack that, but there's something in that feeling for me that there's some relationship between helping people feel the energy of collective power. And so what they get to win, they don't lose anything, but they gain the energy of collective power.
Well, you live in a society which is me, my,
right,
and I,
right,
versus a society that is us and ours.
Yeah, and so shifting that, right? That change, shifting that. Yeah.
All right, I'd love to say that we had time to actually unpack that, but we do not. I want to thank all of our illustrious panelists. Please stick around. I'm just going to introduce what's going to be happening. I want to tell everyone about a workshop that's happening on Sunday that's given by Braver Angels. And it is, if I could find my notes, because of course I'm not on the right page, but I ought to be. A free Zoom workshop on beginning skills for tough conversations about race and public policy. It's a new workshop for them. They say it helps participants develop more skills for listening to others and expressing their own views in ways that lead to more productive conversations with people of their own race, right? So that's going to be interesting. It's free. It's on Sunday from 2 to 5 Eastern, and I put the information in the chat there. Please do come back August 11th. We have a great lineup for you guys. If there is some topic that you want us to bring to light, if there is someone you particularly want us to reach out to as a speaker, please send me an email at lane@lanecobb.com, and I will do my best we will do our best to bring that to you here. I'm going to let Eugene have the last words. Again, Eugene, this panel discussion has been absolutely fabulous. Imam Earl El-Amin, Rabbi Jesse Dressen, Carl Weber, Reverend Viola Abbott, and Reverend Stephen Rambo. You guys are the best. We hope you'll come back.
Yeah. And there's not much more for me to add, again, to all of the panelists. Thank you so very much. One of the things I love about Race Talk Revolution is, and you have played such a huge part in this, is bringing the light, to what's going on, but not only bringing the light, but bringing ways of showing us how we may get involved. And, sometimes, well, not sometimes, it's not always kumbaya. It is a struggle, and when I first heard that this afternoon, I was like, well, no, wait a minute, that's kumbaya where I was going. Not everything is a struggle, but it takes work. And for me, it just continues. For me, it's about continuing to have the willingness to show up. Yeah. So again, I want to thank not just the panelists. Thank you so much for being here, but I also want to thank our Race Talk Revolution family. You guys continue to show up, and it's because of you that Lane and I continue to do this work. Thank you so very much.
Thanks for the sharing you're doing. It means so much of us to know that these conversations are making a difference for you. Thank you again to our panel. Love you all. Have a wonderful week. See you again. Take care.